So I want to introduce Abby and Preet from Ernst & Young, and please join me and welcome them to the stage.
So thank you, Justin, and thank you, everybody, for the opportunity. My name is Abhay. I lead our cybersecurity practice. My background is really twofold. I built large-scale infrastructure for the first 10 years of my life. I got tired of getting audited for every single thing, and decided I was going to go to the dark side. And since then, it's been the most fascinating journey of it all. So what I thought we'd do today, when Justin said we should talk about the SANS 20 controls, we could make it super boring and talk about each control one by one by one. And considering you've had lunch, and I could drone on and on and on, and you'd all fall asleep, which may not be a bad idea. Or I thought what we'd do is we'll talk a little bit about the black market. And I find that fascinating because it gives you the motivation behind why somebody would want to commit compromise a system or a company or a person or whatever. Like, what's the motivation behind it? And the primary driver really is around, can I monetize this? Because you want to monetize, you want to make some money out of this, right? And then I want to talk about, we should do a little bit of a video. Gotta have a video. So we'll do a video on my team that's put together. It's an hour's worth of how do I compromise an organization, starting with a person for dummies. I'll just want to take you through like 2 minutes of a Polycom compromise where some of my previous, I presented this at a mining conference recently, and a lot of people thought it was really creepy. But hey, such is life. And we'll talk about the SANS controls. We'll talk about how you go about applying some of those, and why we think they're reasonably robust in the sense of the types of attacks that we want to see in 16, 17. So without further ado, we spoke about this. Most people here are probably aware, what I really wanted to talk about was what's so unique about Ukraine.
2016.
Maybe we're gonna have it again. So yeah, my bad. Anyway, so we hope we don't have it again. It's what I thought was really fascinating about that was the fact that it was truly multi-vector. It was predetermined. It was well thought through, and it was just before Christmas. It was really the worst time to go through something like this in the cold. Well, the fact that they were able to sort of get back and make it work is one thing, which really says that from an incident response perspective, I was able to put my stuff together. Really interesting in the way that the attack itself took place, and they're still going through forensics around it. And the fact that it was well thought through with respect to how do I go and DDoS the emergency systems and whatnot. Then you ask yourself the question, great, so what? Like, how does one go about this? How much intelligence do you really need to have to be able to mount an attack like this? And then you start digging further with respect to what do I truly need to know? How do I take that information and use it to mount an attack, etc.? And you find that the fact of the matter is that all of this information is reasonably well available, and for somebody that knows how to go and purchase this, probably able to buy it somewhere anyway. So that goes back to sort of further research into the black market and whatnot. So let's do the creepy video. So essentially, the guys went through, and I'll talk about the story, and you can watch the screen. But the story is, how do I compromise a person within an organization? Figure out a way to obtain their credential, or figure out a way to phish them and obtain their credential and put some malware on. Then I figure out which building they're working in, or what kind of physical environment they're working in. Then I understand, based on what I can gather publicly and otherwise, what types of camera systems are on that building, or what kinds of polycoms they use, etc. Then I exploit those to be able to do stuff like this. Or I figure out that they work in the TELUS tower, the controls are from X company, and then I figure out how I can go and turn off the air conditioner just to be a shit disturber, right? And so that's the entire sort of 1 hour dummies video, which people find really fascinating because you get to see how some of this is done and the outcome of that. But the message there really is, for each one of these various attacks and how we put together the story, like, you can purchase each one of these separately from different people. And that's what I thought was really fascinating about the cyber black market today. Is that done? Yes. Okay. So, I did a fair bit of research into this topic itself. And, you can see the construct of the market itself is it's very organized. They share information. And look at it in the context of a business, right? You're very organized. You share information. You collaborate. You exploit vulnerabilities. Or, in business context, you can put, protection against those. And they do it really, really well and very quickly and rapidly and effectively. The service catalog puts most IT companies or organizations that we work with to shame, because you can purchase each one of these separately. You can provide any what you want, and there's a price list attached to it. There are multiple vendors you can choose from, and the better the vendor, the one that has I guess more references, costs a little bit more. The problem with this is when you have a breach of some sort, right? Let's say you bought, I don't know, $400 worth of DDoS, as opposed to $200 worth of potatoes or whatever. For an organization just to respond to that breach, it's $3 to $5 million of money spent even before you do anything, right? All you've done is you've done some investigation, a little bit of incident response. Your legal guys made a killing, and you've done a bunch of communications. So it's really expensive from that standpoint. So what's the trend in the black market? It's really interesting to understand that. There's more activity, dark nets. We're going to have a lot more checking and vetting of participants. As a firm, we do a lot of work in helping some of our financial services institutions around identification of mules that sell account information and whatnot. And when you kind of go through that sort of interaction, it's like a dating game. You're there, you meet the person, they're trying to sell something, you want to get evidence of what they're trying to sell, so you want to see the account, you want to see how much money is in the account, that sort of thing, and then have the transaction actually take place. So, and that's the type of information that our guys end up kind of getting and heading it back to the bank so they can do something with their fraud and whatnot. Crime in general is going to be increasingly networked. There's more targets now, Internet of Things. Today I read in my Twitter post, in my feed it showed up that Barbie is insecure, which I thought was really interesting. There's all of this connectivity is really going to make it more interesting in terms of a target portfolio. And it's just going to increase that service catalog in terms of what I can buy from the black market in terms of attacking things and whatnot. Social networks are going to continuously be exploited. I spoke to somebody this morning who's writing an article about Shodan and this whole, the ability to, see children's webcams and all this other nonsense, and talk about, regulation that, the FTC or somebody could have in order to make sure that, there's adequate protection built into these devices. And they were doing an article on that and wanted to understand, what's going on public sector wise, otherwise, and how organizations are dealing with that. It was quite fascinating kind of conversation. We're also going to see, and people kind of, there's two schools of thought here. One school of thought agrees with me, and the other one doesn't. Believe that identity theft, card theft, is going to be on the down low over the next little while, because apparently the market is flooded with this, and the black market, that is. So what's going to be up and up in 16 and 17 is really going to be targeted attacks, ransomware, that sort of thing, which is an easier, shorter curve for monetizing these types of attacks. And it's a fascinating story. My brother, who lives in India, called me up, because I'm the resident security guy in the house, right, and the family. So anytime somebody has a virus, they call me. Not that I can be of much help, but anyway. So he calls me up and he says, I can't access my computer, but I did get a phone call. Somebody said, give me 3 Bitcoin and I will release, you'll be able to access your computer. What struck me at that, I laughed, but what struck me at that point was this kid can get so close to you as a person. And that was the most telling thing for me with that incident. I mean, we went through a bunch of processes. He lost a bunch of data. He was able to get back data from his online store or whatever. But it was just fascinating that could happen for somebody who has no idea. He has absolutely no idea. He uses his computer to check email, make a couple of presentations, and do an Excel spreadsheet with respect to how he's going to price his generators. That's what he does. And there's going to be a lot more hacking for hire, I think. Which is going to make for very interesting movies from Hollywood, but is also going to be very interesting in terms of what we are going to do as organizations to protect ourselves. So if you look at the standard insurance policy that has cyber insurance, there's always a clause that says if it's a nation state type of an attack or if it's a terrorism related attack, then we're not going to really honor the claim. You can't really prove it because it's going to be affected by a purchase somebody is going to make in the black market. So then is it a nation state attack? Or is it, Preetinder and his buddies organization that is actually conducting the attack? Can't really tell, right? So I see a future that's going to be fascinating in terms of insurance, in terms of insurance fraud, in terms of the ability to really look at how you can insure yourself from a cyber perspective. So the question is, so what do we need to know? In my travels, what I find is organizations today are definitely better prepared and have more information with respect to what they need to do as compared to organizations during my travels 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 4 years ago. They spend, we're starting to spend a lot of time to identify our threats. Some organizations are going through active threat modeling. They go through figuring out, what are the most likely threats to my organization and their assets, because now they have a reasonably clearer view with respect to what their valuable assets are. And if they don't, probably a good idea to go and look at it right now. And that could be human as well, right? You want to make sure that you don't have board compromise. You want to make sure that some of your people continue to have the same level of online integrity as they do outside, simply because it becomes a motivator for human compromise. That's how people are wired. And as we invest more and more into controls that we put in place for our organizations, we're going to continuously find that people are the weakest link. So then you ask yourself the question, if my people are my best organizational asset, what might be the best, attack for the people, and how can I put controls in place for that? And later on we'll talk about implication of controls like SANS 20 and whatnot. But when you look at compromising people, a standard attack would be a phishing attack. Now, I don't know how, there's a variety of people here, but there's when we talk to various organizations, yeah, we did a phishing attack. We did one last year. It was really cool. We had about 8% hit rate, and we'll plan on doing one next year again. And the question is, this is great, but you do pen testing on a regular basis. You scan on a regular basis. If you think your people are your assets, and you also think that they are a weakest link, why wouldn't you do phishing testing on a more regular basis? Well, I don't have an answer for that, right? So, and my guidance has always been, you look at your asset, you figure out what's the best way to kind of compromise it, you model it, and you test those things, because it's more relevant for you to go test those things as opposed to continue to do the same thing over and over again. Your results are not necessarily going to vary that much, right? But from a phishing perspective, I'm just taking that as an example, right? And if you take, I got an 8% hit rate this time, I make it more sophisticated, I ended up with a 3% hit rate, or that hit rate gets reduced further, I know that my people are now listening to all the training that I provide. They're more educated in terms of how this compromise could potentially occur and that sort of thing. So you have some benefit from that you can then put and take it back to your board or whoever you need to take it back to and say, yeah, it's actually yielding some value. And that's how I think we should look at our attacks for the future and how we're investing our security dollars, because the average board now would go, I gave you $50 million last year, how come you're coming back and asking me for the same amount of money this year? Like, what's changed? Well, the threat landscape's changed. There's different kinds of attacks. So what does that really mean? And it's really cool to be able to explain it in the context of specific attacks. It's really cool to explain it in the context of that, so that they're very clear with respect to where the $50 million that they did give you has actually gone. We continue to invest in protection gear. We've spent a lot more in detection, in terms of breach, in terms of this and that and the other thing. I find that organizations today have much more rigor with respect to response, in terms of incident response, in terms of breach response. And we do, I've had the been fortunate enough to be part of some of the simulations that we would conduct at a very senior executive level and at a board level around multi-vector incidents and the implication of that. What I find most, for lack of a better word, alarming, is that people kind of sort of know what they should do, but they don't really know what to say. And at that time, it is really important to understand your obligations in terms of whatever executive position you are in and what you should say. If you get called by media, you get called by a cop, you get called by your neighbor. And I think it's very important. Otherwise, it get really out of hand really quickly. And the simulations serve to help, rehearse and put into muscle memory what people should say and do in case of an incident. The ability to recover is another thing that we're spending a fair bit of time on. And what we're also starting to see is, as people kind of look at their business continuity plans, as they look at their disaster recovery plans and stuff like that, because the fundamental premise has always been around, my building falls apart, I have an earthquake, that sort of thing. But I think, our go forward sort of hypothesis should be, maybe some of those things are probably not going to happen that often. But I could get a virus infestation. I could get a segment of my network completely corrupted. I could have a piece of ransomware sitting around that I don't know, it's a needle in a haystack type of thing. What am I going to do if some one of those types of things was to occur from a continuity of operations standpoint? How do I test something like that in terms of, if I had the ability to do that? Can I do it as a scenario? Can I do it for real? Is that a legitimate business continuity scenario that I'm going to test year on year. I mean, we test, whether our systems are going to stay up, et cetera, et cetera. But all of those things are going to be still valid. You could still have all of this infestation in your network. And I think people are now starting to think about, what are the types of things we could do in terms of cordoning off the attack, being able to, I don't know, shut a room down or shut a segment of the network down. Like, what are our options here? For people that are familiar with OSFI, the regulatory body for our banks, insurance companies, whatnot, had gone to the banks in, I guess it was like June or July of last year, and asked them to kind of think through the scenario of internet down. So what happens if, we shut the internet for whatever reason, national security reasons? And what does it do to your operations? How would you manage the treasury function? How does the card function work? How do your ATMs work? Are people going to have money? So just think through all of those things. And as they kind of thought through all of their operations, it was very evident that there was a lot of work that needed to happen in terms of capability building to be able to actually respond to a situation like that. That was just essentially done to get a good appreciation of, what would you as a financial institution do if something like that was to happen? And banks today are, they're going down the path of understanding, if I did have a multi-vector attack, what would I do? What type of capabilities do I need to have to be able to even contemplate responding? And I think that's a really good way of sort of thinking about the future, thinking about where you want to spend your response dollars and planning dollars going forward. We do surveys every year, and it would be very remiss of me to not put up a survey slide. So, from a priority standpoint, 2015, we found that most organizations are worried about data leaking. And then you ask yourself the question, what's the easiest way of doing this? The easiest way has always been, drop a piece of malware in and let it sit. It's going to call out. It's going to send some data out, and you're good. Then you ask yourself the question, how do I get that piece of malware there? And you do it through phishing, you do it through this or that or the other thing. Then you figure out, what type of controls do I need to have to prevent one of those? And then you go back to sort of your fundamental baseline around, your 20 controls, whatever list of controls that you do end up having, and how do you address those things? So when you come back and you look at, if the exposure from data leakage is the thing that most worries you, you can have a conversation around, here's the vectors that would increase your risk of data leakage. Here's the investments that you've actually put in place to address data leakage. And then you test to make sure that it is actually working, and that investment's actually giving you some result, right? So what I think, it's about time for us to talk about SANS after all. What we want to do is, Preetinder, my colleague, is going to talk about, what is it, an overview. For people that already know, it's probably a little bit of a repeat, but the discussion really is around, do we think it's good or bad or ugly? Do we think it is, how do we go about applying it? And maybe we'll talk about a few things that actually are more interesting than the others in terms of the control set itself, right? So you just click.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much, Abhay, first of all, to set up the context of how the black market is going on. So to start with, first I'll just introduce myself. I am Preetinder Bedi. I was like 10 years approximately in cybersecurity industry. I have implemented many standards and controls around information security systems, business continuity management systems, and somewhat on data privacy and everything. So today what we have just talked about is what the bad guys are doing, how the market is all about. Now, how we can safeguard ourselves. That's where the controls plays an important role. So though there are a number of standards which are available in the market talking about a different set of controls, say there are NISTs there, ISO standards are there, or some other standards are also there. So Center for Internet Security came up with 20 controls with SANS as which is an organization talking about trainings and everything about security. So SANS and CIS came up with a set of control which they are updating on year-on-year basis, and this is the version 6.0 of CIS controls. So these controls are, I would not say that these controls are everything which an organization can do, and they can say that yes, we are safe. But yes, these controls gives you a priority list which we can focus upon as an organization through some of the automated ways how we can prevent us from the attacks. So I'll talk about some of the controls to start with. The control talks about the first two controls are on the inventory. So first, what SANS says that you should know about what you have in place. What are the assets that you have in terms of the hardware assets? What are the assets that you have in terms of the software assets? Now, if as an organization we allow any hardware to come into our organization and you can plug into it and you can access it, how would you know? So the first control talks about you should have automated systems who can actually detect a hardware which is not your organization, sort of a MAC binding. Then if you are putting any hardware into your organization, that should have the security patching done on it. The same goes for the softwares. You should know which softwares you should allow in your organization. It should not be the case that anyone downloads the softwares and can use it, because then your IT administrators would not know that what are the security threats. Are they really patched? Are they current as per the security vulnerabilities? So the organizations should have automated softwares to know that if there is any software which is not in their whitelist, sort of a the concept of a deny all plays a important role here, or you can say that there should be a whitelist of softwares that are allowed in your organizations, which are for which the vulnerabilities are taken care of. You have the security patches up to date on a regular basis, and you perform different analysis on those softwares. Then we are talking about the next control we're talking about is the secure configuration. Now we have the softwares and the hardwares. Now the configurations should be good enough, should be patched. The the security of these are really important. If you don't have a configuration, so we can use a number of tools for ensuring that configurations are secure, configuration management tools, the configurations are up to date. Then we're talking about the next control is continuous vulnerability assessment and remediation. This is something that every organization is doing these days. They are doing about vulnerability assessment. So a lot of time we go to the organizations and we found that, okay, we have a program of vulnerability assessment. How frequently you are doing? Once in a quarter, some say once in a year, once in 6 months. But what's the use? Like after a year, you get to know that there was a vulnerability. So this control talks about a continuous vulnerability assessment. It talks about that in case you're doing a vulnerability assessment, how you are taking care of the past result. Are you looking at the past result from the last time you did a vulnerability assessment to now when you have done a vulnerability assessment? What's the change in your environment? How you are ensuring that, can you see that every time when you are having this vulnerability assessment done, you can see number of vulnerabilities coming to your systems? What are the reasons behind it? Are our patches not sufficient for it? Are we not doing a regular patching and everything? So these controls specifically say that you should have a continuous vulnerability mechanism in place. Then we're talking about administrative privileges, which I think which is a common control. Now, this is one key area where a lot of organizations are compromised. A lot of time, the administrative privileges are provided to the people who actually don't need it. Now, what SANS says that when you are providing an administrative privilege, you should have a proper business case for it, and you should regularly monitor. You should know that you are providing this administrative access to a person. What is he doing around it? Also, when you say administrative privileges, nowadays there are organizations which are looking at practices such as having a different system altogether in place for somebody to do an administrative tasks, and those systems are only connected to the internal network. They are not connected to the internet. So that's also a practice that that's how this control can be implemented. Then we're talking about the next control, maintenance, monitoring, analysis of audit logs. Now, as Abhay discussed about the black market, about the attacks, how do you know what happened wrong? That's where these audit logs are really critical. These days, if you go to any organization, you know that everyone has the audit logs, but who looks at it? That's where the problem starts. Nobody even looks at the audit logs, nobody is reviewing the audit logs, and that's where you would see that no attacker can attack your organization just by in the first go. He tries to gather information about your organization. He wants to know that what is going on, what are the weak links. Those all things are captured in the audit logs. This is one of the very critical control. Like, you have automated softwares which are telling you that how this is a somewhat abnormal activity happening on a particular software. Then the next control, I'll just quickly cover email and web browser protection. Why email needs to be protected? Why web browser needs to be protected? These are the easiest link for an attacker to attack your organization. You have your email, they can send emails to you, and your filters are not working because you are using an email client which is allowing every email to come to you. Then you have web browser, which is allowing a JavaScript to run, which is allowing a lot of services to change. Now, if your web browsers are not protected, this could lead to lead to an attacker having a very, very easy way out to attack you. Then malware defense, which is very common control. We all have antivirus in our computers, and it's common to have. But do we look at which computers are not updated on regular basis? Are we focusing on that area? Are we checking why is that happening? So this malware defense is one of the key defense that we have in place, and that's where the organizations, as per this control, what it suggests that organizations should automate these malware defense systems, so that as soon as you see a particular computer not getting updated, you should get a pop-up that yes, your administrator should know that yes, this is happening. They should go and test them, check that what's happening wrong in those areas. Limitation and control of network ports. A lot of times you download a software or you install a software and you end up opening a lot of services which are unwanted. You end up, you don't do, there are easy softwares available to do a port scanning. So what the control suggests that in your organization you should have a list of the ports that are opened. You should know which are the services that are open. You should continuously check that if there is any port which is now open, which is not required by your organization. So if an attacker wants to attack, he uses very simple software like port scan softwares to know about what are the open ports, what are the services which are open, so that he can plan his attack accordingly. So that's one of the key control. Data recovery capabilities is the next control. We back up data, like every organization backs up its data, but are we really checking that we can recover our data in time? A lot of time we see that we just forget about our data when we back it up. Now, data recovery has a key thing called data testing. You should regularly test our backups. That's key for an organization to know that their data is integrity is not compromised. Do they have the full data that they thought that they have in place, or they are getting it back or not? So data recovery capability. And then secure configuration network devices. Again, we have already talked about the configuration. We need to ensure that our firewalls are secured. We should continuously do a test of firewall configurations. There are different tools available in market to do testings for this. Boundary defense. When we talk about boundary defense, those days are gone when we have one level of boundary defense. Nowadays, the one level is not sufficient. You should have multiple level of boundary defense. So SANS suggests that you should have multiple level of boundary defense at different levels. Your data is segregated. You have the first layer is checking, then you have a second layer of data defense, so that and you have a regular monitoring to ensure that your data defense are effective. Data protection. A lot of time when we talk about data protection, we don't segregate our data. That's one key mistake that a lot of organizations do these days. We have a lot of our public data, which is something that anyone can have access to, the sensitive data, which very specific people have access, and it's all lying together. We don't look at that data differently. We think that, oh, it's same for us, but no. When an attacker attacks you and he finds, though maybe his intent is to find some sensitive data, but if you have a proper control in place in terms of the data protection, you have a separate segregation of your sensitive data into a separate location, and when the first level of defense is compromised, then you get to know that, yes, there is somebody who's trying to compromise your information, and you can actually safeguard your information if you have proper data protection controls. You have data DLP and all other softwares which can help you as an organization to implement the control. So today, what we are here for data. Everything we are talking about is data, and still today, after a lot of breaches, we go to organization and we find that a simple control such as removing the data into a USB, you will find the USB devices are there. People are still able to capture information easily, still after so much of attacks and everything. So that's where SANS suggests that you should have strong controls around the data protection. Controlled access based on need-to-know basis. Now, when we're talking about an access, as we talked about the administrative privileges earlier, here when you don't need an access, why are you really monitoring those access? A lot of time we see that there is an access provided to somebody and that person is not using it. Now, attackers looks for these type of accounts which are not used, and a lot of time you will see that if the IT administrator look at the logs and he says, oh yeah, if he should be a normal user, he is using it now, and actually the person has not used it for last 30-40 days. There are so many softwares available which would automatically block the access after a certain period of time if you are not using it. So SANS suggests that if this is one key area which the organization should look at. This control should be implemented that can ensure that nobody can use those accounts which are not active. Wireless access network, the next control. A lot of time we see that wireless networks are open or they are not secured enough. A person sitting in a car in a parking lot nearby is accessing your wireless network and accessing your data. A lot of time your own employees who are on BYOD, who are using their own device, are having an access through their mobile devices to so much of sensitive data. And you don't have segregation of your data and that's where the wireless access is a key area which an organization should look at. They should have appropriate controls in this area. They should have different segregations of wireless LAN to the local LAN, to the network LAN. Account monitoring and control is next control, that's control number 16. When we say account monitoring, now a lot of accounts are there which are default accounts. You don't look at those accounts. That's one key vulnerability which are there for the default passwords are there for those accounts. You're not even monitoring those accounts. And when those particular softwares were installed, those machines were installed, those accounts align. That's how the attackers look for those particular accounts to attack your organization. Then, as earlier we talked about the people control, that's where the security skill assessment and the appropriate training. We should have appropriate training for our users to actually be able to safeguard our organization. There should be a particular skill set metrics deployed as per the requirement of the organization. It should not be a generic requirement in terms of, okay, I need a person who has done these certifications. No. What your organization requires. Have you provided those particular trainings for those people? Do they have that skill set in place to safeguard your organization? That's one key thing. Application software security, we have already talked about this control earlier about how the softwares that we have in an organization that should be secured. And then we're talking incident response. Now, incidents are happening, attacks are happening on day-to-day basis. They are going to happen. You put a lot of controls, still more vulnerabilities will come out and attacks are happening. Now, how good is your incident response? How fast you can respond to that incident? That's a key thing for an organization to know. They should know that how fast they can respond to that incident and how good they can manage their incident. It's not about after an incident, it's also about how they are taking care of their weaknesses. Do they have a proper mechanism for reporting of the weaknesses, reporting of the events that are happening, how they are taking care of those areas? And last control in the list is penetration testing. Done everything. Now, where we are, what's happening if somebody tries to attack us? Have we tried simulating that? That's where the penetration testing is a really, really important control. Why not? Why you want to give a chance to a third party to come or a hacker to do that? If you have done a vulnerability assessment, or why don't you first ask a third party to check how secure they feel you are, and you will be able to look at your organization that, okay, these are some loopholes which we missed out, and that's where the penetration testing can help you to know those. Now, why we have these SANS 20 controls? Some of the reasons why these controls are good are these controls gives you a prioritized list what we should do. It's not that a laundry list of thousands of controls where, like NIST, if you open up, there are a number of controls, and it takes time. Yes, those frameworks are important, they help the organizations, but when it comes to some key actions that could be done in smaller amount of time. So these controls will help you to have your organization secure to a certain level. And these controls are used by the other frameworks also, like NIST has a reference to these controls. And these controls, this is the first time that this is a public and the private partnership. Earlier, what used to happen, one organization comes up, okay, this is my framework, these are the controls. Another organization comes up, this is my list of controls. This is the first time that the public sector and the private sector sat together, understand what are the key problems that we are facing, and they come up with a prioritized list of controls so that they know that, okay, these are the key areas which if you take care, I would not say you take care of 100% of the stuff, but at least you take care of 70 to 80% of the things. How you can look toward having these control into your organization. Some of the key steps is you make a inventory of what you have, you do a gap assessment, which are the areas you should focus upon out of these 20 controls. These controls can very well act as a checkpoint for your organization to know where things are going wrong. Basis your gap assessment, you can always look at the first set of prioritized control that you should look at, and then you can have a roadmap for rest of the controls and those controls, how you can implement, and that's a sort of an ongoing cycle where you can look at those controls with a period of time, and then you can use this control to give a clear view to the management that where things were going wrong and how implementation of these controls have helped the organization to improve. Okay, so I'm on my final slide on summarizing everything. So the first point is offense informs defense. Somebody has been attacked. Somebody's organization data is gone. Now, we should learn from those things. Those offenses, or to your own organizations also, we should learn from the incidents. Those all measures that should have been taken by that organization, if you take those measures, it could help your organization, and you could be one who is not compromised. Prioritization, which it gives a clear list of prioritization. As per your gap assessment, you should look at what is the priority for you as an organization out of all those 20 controls. SANS is not saying implement everything. Look at what is your risk areas, where things are going wrong for you, implement those controls. You can have those matrices wherein you can easily measure the effectiveness of these controls, where things are going wrong, and how the control is improving with time. Continuous monitoring. Monitor those controls on an ongoing basis. You would know that where we were like a year back, now you have those controls more effective in your organization. And then automation. For all the controls, when you go through SANS 20, they talk about automating stuff. They talk about having the human intervention to the least possible. You have everything automatic that will help you to have automated softwares to help your organization to know about what's happening, because manually, practically, it's not possible to implement everything. Gone were the days when you were talking about having, okay, I have a physical security guard and everything is taken care of. No, today we don't talk about that. We have everything automated. So that's about the whole idea about SANS 20, how we can have all the bad people doing stuff and how we can improve our organization or with the help of these SANS 20 controls.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Preet.
Thank you.